Sgraffito is Italian for scratched. It's a technique commonly used in painting, pottery, and glass, and it consists of putting down a preliminary surface, covering it with another, and then scratching the superficial layer in such a way that the pattern or shape reveals the color underneath. To create this chart, I'm using a sheet of 9 by 12 inch cold press watercolor paper in my sketchbook, and I'm using a ruler and a Sharpie to measure out 6 4-inch by 4.5-inch boxes. Next, I'm grabbing a sheet of pellet paper and just selecting several colors to try. I think it's good to try a variety. And after I lay out my colors, I'm just going to grab some flat paintbrushes to start painting swatches of different colors in each box. I'm figuring each box could probably have 4 different swatches, but you can do it however you want. My goal was just to try a variety of colors, just to see what I could come up with. After I'm done painting the swatches, it's important to let them dry for a minute. So while they're drying, I'm going to go ahead and label each box. The first one is back of a brush, then we have palette knife, then plastic cutlery, stylus tool, gift card, and finally catalyst tools. For the first Sgraffito technique, I'm going to try the back of a paintbrush. And the back of a paintbrush, there's a lot of variety there with thickness, shape, so try several different ones. But what you'll do is coat a second color on top of the dried layer, and then while that layer is still wet, use the back of your paintbrush to essentially etch in a design. Here I'm just doing some wavy little squiggly lines. As I move my hand back, you'll be able to see it better. But then I'm going to go ahead and just try some different brushes, different lines, different colors, and just explore and see what I come up with. My thought process is through this chart and exploration, I can discover things I might want to pull into a final painting. Or maybe I have a design or technique that I end up liking that could become a background, or some hair texture, or just a design or pattern, or anything I might want to use Sgraffito for. So the next tool I'm going to be using are some palette knives. I have a few here. There are lots of different palette knife shapes. So once again, I think it's fun to try some different palette knives, or even if you have just one, maybe you can try scratching in different ways or using the tip of the palette knife versus the side of the palette knife. You might be able to create some different types of scratched Sgraffito texture. Next up, we have plastic cutlery. I've got a knife and fork here, although you could try a spoon too if you have one on hand. And the same process, starting with the wet paint, I can use the fork here to scratch in and create a design. And having, the different prongs there provides a different opportunity than the back of the brush or the palette knife, which is cool. And then of course the knife texture with that little serrated edge can be really interesting and give me some different kinds of lines and texture as well. And that's what this is all about, is just exploring different ways you can make texture, marks within the paint. It's an exploration of layering, and you can even layer more on top of the dried Sgraffito and keep building more layers if you want to. So again, that's the whole idea of this chart, is to explore, it's to play, it's to figure out what you like. Some of them you're probably going to like a lot more than others, and I'll have my favorites, and there'll be things that maybe I want to introduce into a painting. Next up, I have a stylus tool. Now, there's lots of different stylus tools and sizes too that you could explore. Or if you don't have a stylus tool, maybe you could try like a paper clip or a little T-pin or something else with a small end that you can draw into. But I find the stylus tool gives me the most precision out of any of them. I can use it a lot like a pencil, and I find it even more so than the back of a paintbrush. So for these next ones, I'm going to use the same stylus tool for all of them, but I'm just going to try making different marks in different ways to see what I can come up with. For the next one, I'm going to use a plastic gift card, and you can actually use scissors to kind of cut up some of the edges to create, different types of scratching tools. But the same process, the idea is I want to make sure that top layer is wet while I scratch into it. And I'm just going to explore the card in different ways, and I'm going to cut out a couple notches too and try that. Here's an example. I'm just going to lay an extra bit of color on here and scratch again. So sometimes if you're not liking it while it's still wet, you do have an opportunity to shift it or change it, add more color in and re-scratch. Next up, I have these catalyst tools, which are designed for Sgraffito essentially and making marks with paint. And I'm using them the same way. I actually link some in the description if you want to check them out. You can get them from Amazon, art supply stores like Blick. But they're really great because the different types of tools can provide different types of lines. They have different edges that you can use, which can be a great way to explore just different types of mark making with the acrylic paint. Now here is the completed chart when everything is dry. I always like to check it out when it's really dry because sometimes the colors might surprise you. They maybe show up a little bit more when they're dried versus when they're wet. But have fun, explore different ways to make texture with acrylic paint. And again, these are just 6 different tools. There are lots of other possibilities.